Hello, I'm Michael, and if you're here, it's because you're as attracted to fear as I am. Today we are going to tell you Rodolfo's story in a Real Horror Forum. Good evening, I would like to introduce myself before starting. My name is Rodolfo Lopez. I am from Chihuahua, and I am 34 years old. This story is somewhat recent, and it is the first time that I expose it to an older audience and outside of my trusted group. Since whenever the story causes a lump in my throat, I still find it difficult to assimilate it. I am a cargo trucker. I have been working in this for more than 5 years. My trips are usually along the entire border with the United States. I am already familiar with those roads both forward and backward. I always go on extensive trips that can last up to 4 or 5 days, staying in cabins to rest. Before I begin to tell my anecdote, I would like to clarify that no, I do not take any kind of substance, nor do I consume alcohol, much less on my trips. The only thing I can tell you is that I am addicted to junk food. However, I will begin to tell you what happened to me that morning. I was making a long trip. I was wide awake since I had just left a hookah where I had had a good sleep. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning. I was driving in a mountainous region with numerous curves. I was going very slowly and focused on the journey since I have a wife and 2 children who always wait for me at home. I remember that shortly before reaching a sharp curve, someone suddenly cut me off. However, what shocked me the most was that the person who had crossed me was my younger brother. He had died years before from an illness. He was 18 years old when he lost his life. Before continuing, if you enjoy my content, leave your like, subscribe, and tell me at what time you dare to listen to these macabre. Now without further interruptions, let's continue. I knew it was him instantly. He was wearing his soccer uniform in which we had buried him. And my only reaction was to brake almost suddenly. I was very agitated and scared. I looked everywhere to see where my brother had gone, but I couldn't see him anymore. He was no longer anywhere, but I was still there statically, without being able to understand what the hell had happened. Meanwhile, a truck that was approaching behind me avoided me, and passed me shouting some rude words at me. I took a deep breath, and I tried to calm down so I could continue driving because the impression I had been very great. I regained my calm and began to advance slowly, gradually approaching that curve, but before arriving, I suddenly saw a truck coming from the side. On the contrary, it strongly impacted the other truck that had passed me head-on. The truck that passed me fell into a not very deep ravine, but the driver lost his life instantly. They had been 2 shocking things that I had witnessed in less than 5 hours. Minutes, I couldn't stop shaking. I immediately called emergencies, and meanwhile I turned on the turn signals so that other cars would slow down as they approached the place that was a disaster. But by a miracle, the driver of the truck that came from the opposite side survived. Although yes, he was very badly injured, the guy was drunk, and of course he was arrested after being treated at the hospital. I left the scene, but my head wouldn't stop processing, thinking about everything that had happened to me in those 5 minutes, wondering if my brother had crossed me because he knew what was going to happen and wanted to save my life, I felt. And to this day I feel that that is why he manifested himself. He wanted to save me. Although sadly another person suffered that fate and lost his life, it is difficult to explain how I felt. I had many mixed feelings. I felt guilty because I had to be the one who crashed with that truck, and I also felt afraid, but at the same time grateful for my deceased brother, because I knew what intention had manifested itself to me. Although I felt all the time that I had altered my destiny, I don't know, but it was something very difficult to process. I thank you for taking the time to listen to my experience. I do it with all due respect for the victim of that fatal accident, and I can't stop praying for him and his family. We continue. Hello, my name is Juan Carlos, and I work as a transporter. I am originally from Mexico City, but I make trips to different areas of the Mexican Republic, transporting raw materials. I have been in this business for years because my father, may he rest in peace, dedicated his entire life to this business. Since my childhood, I was fascinated by trucks. I always longed to be like him. Now I understand that it is not an easy job, especially in times when the roads have been. This story is of a paranormal nature. It was the first and only time that I have experienced something of this nature, and it was very shocking. That night in one of my trips through the Republic, I was leaving one of those restaurants that are on the highways. It was after 10 at night when I left the place, already heading to make the delivery. I had about 9 hours left on the road. I was talking to a friend through the speaker of my phone. He had just had problems with his wife and was telling me the whole situation. And it's not to be bad, but that helped me entertain myself and not make me sleepy. That's why I always liked it, talking to someone or listening to music. I was crossing a road that is famous for the crime in the place. I was a little nervous because not even a month ago one of my colleagues had been assaulted on that same route, but the talking to my friend calmed me down a lot. But suddenly there was something that caught my attention. Wait for me, I'm seeing people in the mountains. I told my friend who was on the phone, like, people, you're onto something, right? He responded, laughing. Way of mocking. I stopped answering him for a few seconds because I slowed down to be able to see well. And indeed, there were many people, men and women, standing among the bush, on the right side of the road, which one passed by. I asked my friend repeatedly. He sounded worried. I answered yes. I wasn't going to believe it, but there were many people stops and moves seeing me. He alerted me to get out of there, that it could be some trap to assault me, so I listened to him and left what I had just seen was something confusing and disturbing. Neither my friend nor I knew what was happening. He later made fun of it, telling me that I got involved in things, and that's why I saw people in the mountains. But I was really very scared, although after a few hours I forgot about it, sometime later. I complied with the delivery. It took a few hours to unload the truck. Then I slept in the cabin almost all day because I had to recover for the return, and around 8 at night I hit the road, back to my city. The whole way was normal, quiet, with nothing out of the ordinary. It was already early morning when I was going to pass by that place again. I remembered exactly where it had been, because I even memorized the kilometer. This time I wasn't talking to anyone, which made it twice as important. Creepy when I passed by there, and I saw them again. They were the same. They were still standing in the same position as the night before. They all saw me passing by without doing anything, without moving. This time I didn't stop. I passed at the same speed that I was going. But if I managed to see them, it was too late to call my friend and tell him. So I waited for dawn because he got up at 6 to go to work. When the time came, I called him, and I told him I had seen those people again, in the same position as the night before. He was very confused, just like me, and he asked me what kilometer it was and what road. I gave him the number and the name, and he told me. He said he would call me in a few minutes. After 5 minutes, he called me. He told me that he had searched the exact place on the internet, and the first thing that appeared was news that graves of bodies had been found in that place, almost all of them. The bodies were immigrants, and all of this had happened a few months ago. My skin got all red. I said rude things to my friend, asking him not to play with it. But he responded that since he thought I was going to be inventing something, he told me to check it myself when I got home. Everything was on the internet. There were even photos. It was the first thing I did when I got home, and I verified that everything my friend had told me was true. No, I wanted to see the photos, but I did read several notes that talked about the same thing. There were more than 50 bodies piled up. It was very sad for me to read that. I couldn't stop thinking about whether the people I had seen were them, or rather, their souls, without being able to leave. Today it is difficult for me to tell this story. Many people do not believe me, but sadly it was something that I had to live, and I do not understand why they manifested themselves precisely to me, or perhaps also other people who passed through. They could see them there, I don't know. This story is in their honor and memory, with respect for each of those lives that were taken. My name is Patricio Garza. I am from Chiapas, Mexico, and I am a transporter. I am already 45 years old, and half of my life I have dedicated myself to the same thing, because I enjoy it a lot. Over time I have made many friends in that job. Many of my colleagues became close to me. I know their families and they know mine. So after this context, I will begin to share the paranormal anecdote that I had to live. One night when I was working on the road, I decided to get to a place where they allow us truck drivers to park to rest. There are also bathrooms and a small restaurant. I almost always meet many of my friends and colleagues in that place, and it is always good to spend a little time with them while we eat or have dinner. Anyway, I arrived at the place and I parked. I was walking through the parking lot to get to the restaurant and the bathroom, but suddenly I saw a woman standing in the middle of 2 trucks that were parked, and when I looked at her carefully, I noticed that she was the wife of one of my colleagues, who by the way had not seen him for a long time, and I did not know anything about him. So I was happy to see his wife. I approached and greeted her with a smile, but she did not return the greeting, nor did she smile. I told her that I was the one they called Duck, her husband's friend and colleague, that we had met at that party, because I thought that she didn't remember me, and that's why she hadn't responded to my greeting, but she still didn't tell me. Nothing. I noticed she was very strange. I asked her if she was waiting for her husband, and she said yes, nodding her head. So I told her that I was going there where he was, that he would talk to let her know that she was waiting. After that I hurried to get to the restaurant, and before going to the bathroom, the first thing I did was look for my colleague among all the truck drivers who were there, until I finally found him. he was leaving the bathroom. First I didn't greet him at all, and he greeted me with great pleasure, because as I already said, we hadn't seen each other for a long time. He had stopped working for a while, but we never knew because after greeting and hugging each other, I told him that his wife was out of her truck waiting for him, that she had not recognized me when I greeted her, but that I had told her that I would go and tell him that she was waiting for him, and her reaction was very disturbing for me, because the smile erased from her face. Her eyes, they got teary and said, "It can't be." That's when I saw that he took out his phone, and with his shaking hands he dialed a number. Meanwhile, I stayed there with him because I didn't know what was happening. When they answered, he let go. "Cry," he said no repeatedly with a torn voice. Many companions went with him to see what was happening. We hugged him and asked him what was happening, until he was able to tell us, between cries and a broken voice, that his wife had terminal cancer, and they had just told him that he had already died. I was shocked. I couldn't even hug him. My legs were shaking. Everyone hugged him and tried to comfort him, but no one had seen his wife outside his truck, waiting for him just a few minutes ago. I don't remember exactly what it was like, but I was shocked, when suddenly he got up from the floor and started to ask me where I had seen her, where I had seen his wife, and I just broke down crying, because I didn't want to stir up his pain anymore. I had understood that the woman I saw was her. Maybe she had wanted to go say goodbye to him. He kept asking me where she was, and I answered that it was outside his truck, but that maybe she had confused me, that maybe it hadn't been her, that she shouldn't pay attention to me. But he ran out anyway, 2 colleagues and I ran after him. But when he got to his truck there was no one. His wife was no longer there. I just gave him a very tight hug. He continued crying inconsolably, so a colleague offered to take him home in his truck, since he was not in a position to drive. I had the box of my truck empty, since I had already come from making the delivery. So I offered to go make the delivery that he had to make for the next day. We moved the things to my truck and I drove away with tears in my eyes. It was a very great impression that I had to experience. His great love went to say goodbye to him. But I still don't understand why it was my turn to see her, and not him, her husband. Hello, Glenn. Before I tell you my story, I would like to ask you not to mention my name, mainly for safety. You will understand why when I tell you what happened to me. I am a trucker or transporter, whatever you prefer to call it. I consider myself one of the few to whom nothing paranormal had ever happened on terrestrial journeys, beyond scares caused by criminal groups, but nothing inexplicable, and I even found it difficult to believe. That night on my usual route, it was after 12 p.m. The night when I was driving along this road that I travel every week, I was listening to music and eating a snack. Everything was quiet, nothing out of the ordinary, but suddenly, in the distance I noticed that someone was walking on the side of the road. We slowed down a little because we were practically surrounded by mountains. There were still about 2 hours to get to the next city. Those roads are very dangerous. They are inhabited by some organized crime gangs. It is not safe to drive there at night, much less walk. And even less so if you are a woman, because as I got closer I realized that it was a woman. It was in fact a young woman who was walking barefoot and wearing a torn dress. Her hair was loose and disheveled. I stopped to offer her help. I didn't want to make her uncomfortable, nor make her afraid of me, but I couldn't leave her there alone, as she said. It was a very dangerous road, and if I didn't help her they were going to lift her up. I stood next to her and asked her if she was okay, and she stopped. Walking, she turned to look at me with her lost look, and I noticed that she had bruises on her face. She didn't answer me anything. I thought maybe they had kidnapped her and had just released her, or even that she had escaped. So I told her to get on quickly to the truck because she was afraid that someone was following her to hurt her. She didn't think twice and got in, sitting in the passenger seat. The truth is she didn't know what to do, because if she called the police maybe they would end up returning her to her captors. Those who live in Mexico will understand me. We no longer know who is good and who is bad. I just wanted to take her to her family, so I asked her on different occasions where she lived, what her name was, and if she knew any phone number from a family member. But in all these questions she only turned to look at me, but she didn't answer me anything. It was obvious that she was in shock, or that's what I deduced. I decided to take her to the next city, to take her to a hospital to be checked. I didn't know what else to do for her if I knew absolutely nothing about the girl. I even called my wife to tell her what was happening to me. The first thing she told me was to make sure that no one was following me, because she was afraid that in order to help her they were going to do something to me too. But I told them no, that no one was following me, because if I was paying attention at all times, my wife is a witness of what happened that night, and it's good that she told me. I decided to call her to update her. The entire journey the young woman did not speak. She walked with her arms on her legs and only looked ahead with a lost look. She did not know about herself. I offered her the little food I brought, but she did not want to. Or rather, she didn't answer me anything. She was like traumatized or something like that. But anyway, before we got to the city, she opened the door of the truck out of nowhere. I stopped because she could fall and get hurt. But the moment I stopped, she got off and ran towards the mountain. And I couldn't find her anymore. Everything was very strange. I didn't know what to do. I did look for her, but it was as if she had vanished among the branches. Already I couldn't find her. I called my wife and asked her what she was doing, if I should call the police to inform her. But she told me no, because they could be the same ones, and they could also blame me for what happened. It would have happened to the girl, so I just left there praying for her, because someone else with a good heart would find her and help her. I finished that trip and about 3 days passed. I was at home resting. I was wasting time on social networks. When suddenly I saw that a news page had shared the search bulletin for that woman. All the characteristics coincided. There was no doubt that it was her. The publication was from 5 days ago, just the day on which I had met her on the road. But there she said that it had been more than 2 weeks since the last time her relatives saw her. Without thinking twice, I contacted her mother. I called her on the phone number she had left for her daughter's reports. She was from a state very far away from where I met her. I live in the north of the country, and she was from the south. Very nervous, I told her everything I just told you, and that the last when I saw her, she had run in the direction of the mountain for about 1 kilometer. But the lady told me that I had surely confused her, that it couldn't be her daughter, because 2 days ago they had called her to give her her remains. And according to the forensics, they had taken her life the same day they took her. I couldn't believe it, because it had only been 4 days since I had seen her, and the girl had disappeared for 2 weeks, the same as according to the forensics she had been dead. I responded with great respect to the lady that I was sure it was her. She had a very particular sign, which was a very noticeable mole on her left leg. The girl I brought up also had it. But the lady told me she insisted that it couldn't be her, that the tests had already been done to identify her, and they came out positive. It matched the woman's blood. It was her daughter. She told me crying that they had found her in an abandoned truck in a mountain where they had more women's bodies, but she couldn't speak because they had threatened her. She asked me not to talk about it with anyone anymore, and she also thanked me for having called her. But she insisted to the end that it couldn't have been her daughter, as young man that I took to my trailer. After hanging up, I started crying. My wife was there and heard everything on the speaker. She hugged me without saying anything, and also shed some tears. I kept telling her that it was her, while my wife claimed that she trusted me. What happened to that girl left me deeply sad, and now I no longer know if it was her spirit that moved through that mountain, if not all the time. Every Sunday, my wife and I go to church to light a candle and pray for his soul. Even though some Sundays I can't go because of my travels, my wife does it for me. I just wish that you are already in a more suitable place, resting in peace. Good night. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with stories that will leave you breathless.